Late night in downtown Chicago. The tech tower is silent, shadows stretching long on the 37th floor. Victoria Langford, the young CEO, steps into the elevator after a brutal investor meeting. Just as the doors begin to slide shut, two men in sharp suits force their way inside. Victoria's heart races. They aren't employees. They're aggressive investors, and they want her to sign a deal she already refused. In the back corner, a man in a simple jacket stands quietly. Daniel Brooks, a single father and engineer. When they corner Victoria, Daniel speaks 6 words. "You should leave this elevator now. Watch. Now." Daniel Brooks was a man who lived in the invisible architecture of the city. At 41, his face was a map of quiet focus and the deep, enduring weariness of a man who worked 2 lives, one to keep the digital world running and one to keep a small home safe. He was a senior back-end systems engineer at Vanguard Tech, responsible for the infrastructure that handled millions of transactions per second. In the high-speed, high-ego world of Chicago's financial district, Daniel was a ghost. He wore simple, ironed cotton shirts, heavy work trousers, and a pair of sturdy shoes that had seen years of service. While others shouted about disruption and leverage, Daniel was a pocket of absolute, reliable silence. Daniel had worked for the company for 4 years. Among the younger developers, he was a legend they rarely saw. He was the one who could find a logic error in a million lines of code while the servers were smoking. He was the one who stayed late to help a junior dev fix a database leak, even when it wasn't his job. He moved through the humming server racks like a priest in a temple of silicon. But Daniel was also the man who never attended the Friday night happy hours. He never joined the company golf outings. He never lingered in the break room to gossip about who was getting the next big promotion. Every day at exactly 3 p.m., he would check his watch and move with a singular purpose toward the exits. Daniel was a single father. 5 years ago, his world had been hollowed out in a way words couldn't describe when his wife Sarah passed away. In the aftermath of that loss, Daniel's life had become a masterpiece of routine designed to protect the only thing that mattered to him, his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. He had walked away from a high-paying, high-travel role in global cybersecurity because he needed to be the father who was there for the school projects, the bad dreams, and the Saturday morning pancakes. He didn't need a fancy title on a door. He needed to be a hero in a small, warm apartment filled with Lego sets and half-finished science posters. On this particular Tuesday, however, the system had failed. A catastrophic server lag in the primary data center had forced Daniel to stay long after his usual departure time. He had spent the last 7 hours in a windowless room, the air smelling of ozone and hot plastic. His fingers had been flying across the keys, his mind a whirlwind of logic gates and encrypted tunnels. He was chasing a phantom lag, a glitch that moved every time he tried to pin it down. He had missed dinner. He had missed the bedtime story. By the time the green lights on the dashboard finally signaled nominal, he was exhausted to his very marrow. His eyes felt like they were full of sand. He grabbed his faded canvas jacket and his worn backpack, heading for the elevators on the 37th floor. The office was a sea of empty cubicles, the only light coming from the emergency exit signs. His only thought was of Emma, sleeping at his sister's house, and the apology he would have to give her in the morning for missing their Tuesday taco night. He stepped into the elevator, the chrome walls reflecting his tired, bloodshot eyes. The car was empty for only a second before the doors opened again on the executive level. Victoria Langford stepped in. At 27, she was the youngest CEO in the building, a woman of sharp edges and even sharper intelligence. She was carrying a leather portfolio like a shield against the world, her face a mask of professional exhaustion. She didn't look at Daniel. She stood at the front, staring at the floor indicators as if she could make the car move faster with her mind. Just as the sensor began to close the doors, 2 men in tailored charcoal suits stepped in. They were large men, possessing the kind of aggressive, heavy energy that fills a room like a physical weight. They didn't look like engineers. They looked like predators who had been waiting in the shadows of the hallway for their prey to emerge. Daniel retreated into the corner, pulling his backpack tight to his chest. His presence as a worker made him invisible to them. He watched as the elevator began its long, silent descent. He didn't know that he was about to witness a collision between power and pressure, and he didn't know that his daughter's lessons on standing tall were about to be put to the ultimate test in a box of steel. The elevator car was a masterpiece of glass and polished steel, but as it moved past the 35th floor, the air inside became suffocating. The two men didn't stand at the buttons or look at their phones. They stood in a semicircle, effectively pinning Victoria against the front panel. The scent of their expensive cologne clattered against the clinical, metallic smell of the elevator. "You ignored our proposal, Victoria," the taller man said. His voice was a smooth, dangerous silk that made the hair on Daniel's neck stand up. "Our fund doesn't like being ignored. We offered you a way out of the quarterly slump, and you walked out of the room. That was a very public insult." Victoria didn't flinch. She adjusted her grip on her portfolio, her chin lifting with a defiant grace that Daniel secretly admired. "I didn't ignore it, Mr. Sterling. I reviewed it, and I rejected it because your way out involves stripping my company of its R&D department and firing 400 people. The answer is still no. This conversation is over." The second man, shorter but broader, took a half step closer. The proximity was a weapon. "You're making a very expensive mistake, little girl. The board is already leaning toward our side. If you don't sign the letter of intent tonight, we'll make sure the market opens with a series of very uncomfortable rumors about your leadership stability. We can burn your reputation faster than you built it." The elevator hummed, the digital floor numbers flickering with a cold, blue light. 30, 29, 28. Victoria's breathing was steady, but Daniel, from his corner, could see the slight, telltale tremor in her hand. He had spent years in the service before his life as an engineer. He knew what a tactical enclosure looked like. These men weren't just negotiating, they were bullying. They were using the small, confined space of the elevator to make her feel small, to make her feel cornered and helpless. "Step back," Victoria commanded, her voice regaining its icy CEO edge, though it sounded thinner than before. "You are infringing on my personal space. We will discuss this at the office tomorrow in the presence of my legal team." The taller man laughed, a shallow, mocking sound that echoed off the chrome walls. "The office is empty, Victoria, and so is this elevator, except for us and, well, the help." He didn't even look back at Daniel. To him, the man in the faded jacket was just part of the machinery, as irrelevant as the emergency phone behind the panel. The men moved in unison, closing the gap until they were inches from her. The broad-shouldered man reached out, his hand resting on the wall just above Victoria's shoulder, a classic intimidation tactic designed to make her feel like she had nowhere to run. "Sign the paper, Victoria. Don't make this a long night for everyone. You look tired. You should be at home, resting in your penthouse, not fighting a battle you've already lost." Victoria's eyes darted toward the emergency phone, but the men were blocking it. She was trapped in a 300-ton box of steel, descending through the heart of the city, and the only other person there was a quiet technician she had never spoken to. She felt the walls closing in, the air getting thinner. Daniel Brooks watched it all. His mind wasn't on code anymore. It was on the vibration of the room. He felt a familiar, cold clarity settle over him. The kind of clarity he used to feel during high-altitude deployments in the dark. He looked at the men's posture. He looked at the fear hidden behind Victoria's eyes. He thought about Emma. He had taught her that if you see someone being pushed into a corner, you don't walk away. You don't look at the floor. You stand up, even if you're the smallest person in the room. He realized that these men believed they were the most powerful things in the building because they had money and expensive suits. They believed that because Daniel looked simple, he was also weak. They had miscalculated the system. They were focusing on the front end of the situation, but they had completely ignored the back-end strength standing right behind them. Daniel took a slow, grounding breath. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't use a hostile tone. He simply took one deliberate, heavy step forward, moving from the shadows of the corner into the center of the light. The movement was so fluid, so controlled, that it made both men turn their heads in genuine surprise. The air in the elevator suddenly felt pressurized, as if a storm had just entered the car. Daniel looked the taller man directly in the eye, his gaze as steady as a horizon line. He was no longer a tired engineer. He was a father who knew exactly what a threat looked like, and he was a man who had decided that the conversation was indeed over. The taller man, Mr. Sterling, let out a huff of disbelief. He looked at Daniel's scuffed shoes, then at the oil stain on his jacket, and then back at his face. He expected to see a man looking for a way to apologize and slide back into the corner. He expected a, "Sorry, I'm just leaving." Instead, he saw a wall of calm, a wall he couldn't move. "You should leave this elevator now," Daniel said. The words weren't loud. They weren't a scream. They were spoken with a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate the chrome walls and rattle the light fixtures. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact, as certain as a law of physics. The shorter man, the one with his hand on the wall, sneered. He dropped his arm and turned fully toward Daniel, his chest puffing out like a bird of prey. "And who the hell are you? The janitor? Go back to your bucket, pal. This is grown-up business. You're 1 second away from losing your job, your pension, and your dignity. Get back in your corner." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He took another step, placing himself directly between Victoria and the two men. He was broader than they realized once he stood tall, his shoulders filling the narrow space. He shielded her with his frame, creating a human barrier that their aggression couldn't penetrate. "I'm someone who works here," Daniel replied. His voice was clinical, devoid of emotion, like an automated system reporting a critical error. "And right now, I'm the one telling you that the 30th floor is your stop. The doors are about to open. If you're still inside when they close, the situation changes from a discussion to an incident. You don't want an incident. In an incident, the variables become very unpredictable." "Is that a threat?" Sterling asked, his voice rising in pitch, a sign of his mounting uncertainty. He was used to people trembling before his wealth. He wasn't used to a man in a work jacket looking at him like he was a minor technical glitch that needed to be deleted. "It's a diagnosis," Daniel said calmly. The elevator pinged, a sharp, clear sound in the silence. The digital display read 30. The doors slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss, revealing the dark, empty lobby of the legal department. The hallway was a canyon of deep shadows and flickering security lights. For 5 seconds, no one moved. The two men looked at Daniel, trying to find a crack in his armor. They looked for a sign of hesitation, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But Daniel stood like a statue, his hands relaxed but ready, his eyes locked onto Sterling's with an intensity that promised a very short, very one-sided fight. He had seen men like this before, men who used their status as a weapon because they had never had to face a real consequence in the dark. The broad-shouldered man started to reach out, perhaps to push Daniel aside, but Sterling caught his arm. Sterling was a predator, and predators have an instinct for when the prey has turned into something else. He saw the way Daniel was balanced on the balls of his feet. He saw the absolute lack of panic in his breathing. He realized that the man in the faded jacket wasn't just the help. He was a variable they hadn't accounted for, and he was dangerous. "This isn't over, Victoria," Sterling spat, trying to salvage a shred of his ego as he stepped back. "We'll be at the board meeting at 9 a.m. And you, whatever your name is, I hope you like looking for work in the suburbs. You're finished in this town." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't even acknowledge the threat. He simply pointed toward the open doors with a single, steady finger. The two men stepped out into the dark hallway. They walked quickly, their footsteps echoing with a hurried, embarrassed rhythm on the marble. As the elevator doors began to close, Daniel reached out and tapped the close door button, sealing them out of the car. The silence that followed was different. The pressure was gone. The car felt light again. Victoria Langford stood against the back wall, her chest heaving as she finally allowed herself to take a full, deep breath. She looked at the back of the man who had just saved her. She saw the fraying collar of his jacket and the way he exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally losing their rigid, defensive set. You didn't have to do that," Victoria whispered. Her voice was shaky, the adrenaline finally washing through her system like ice water. "They have powerful friends. They could really try to hurt your career. Why would you risk everything for someone you don't even know? Daniel turned around, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. The warrior was gone, replaced by the dad who just wanted to go home and sleep. He adjusted his backpack. I spend my days fixing systems that are built on logic, Daniel said softly. Those men weren't logical. They were just loud. And in my experience, the loudest things in a system are usually the ones that are about to break. I wasn't going to let them break you in my elevator. Physics doesn't allow it. The car reached the 15th floor. Victoria looked at him, really seeing him for the first time. She noticed the lines of exhaustion around his eyes and the grease on his knuckles. She realized that she had been running this company for 3 years, and she had never once bothered to look at the people who kept the lights on after she went home. I was annoyed, Daniel added, his smile widening slightly. I have a 10-year-old at home who is very strict about my arrival time. They were making me late for a very important science project involving a cardboard volcano. I don't like missing volcanic eruptions, Victoria laughed. It was a short surprise sound that broke the last of the tension. She felt a surge of gratitude that money couldn't buy. She realized that in a building full of VPs, lawyers, and directors, the only person who had the courage to stand up for her was a man whose name she didn't even know. I'm Victoria, she said, offering her hand. Brooks, he replied, shaking it firmly. Daniel Brooks, senior systems engineer, or according to those guys, the help. As the elevator continued its descent toward the ground floor, Victoria realized that the most important asset in her company wasn't the code or the contracts. It was the quiet, unshakable integrity of a man who knew exactly when to speak 6 simple words. She looked at his hand. It was strong, steady, and for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone in the light. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft, final chime. The doors opened to the grand marble lobby, where the night security guards were nodding off behind their desks. The air was cool and smelled of rain and city exhaust. Victoria stepped out first, but she stopped and waited for Daniel. She looked at her watch. It was nearly 11:30 p.m. The city outside was a blur of taxi lights and wet pavement. The skyscrapers around them felt like silent giants guarding a sleeping world. Daniel, Victoria said as he walked toward the glass exit. I mean it. Thank you. I've been in rooms with world leaders and billionaire investors, and I've never seen anyone stay as calm as you did back there. You weren't even breathing hard. Most people would have been shaking. Daniel stopped, pulling his jacket tighter against the damp breeze coming through the revolving doors. Fear is just a reaction to an unknown variable, Victoria. I've dealt with enough systems to know that if you stay calm, you can solve the problem. If you panic, you become part of the problem. You lose your ability to read the data. My daughter, Emma, she's the one who really taught me that. She has a way of staying calm during the biggest storms, even when the Lego tower falls. She sounds like a remarkable girl, Victoria said, a genuine warmth in her eyes that reached her tired expression. She's my North Star, Daniel replied. She's the reason I'm an engineer. I wanted to build a world that worked properly for her. I wanted things to be stable. Victoria hesitated, her CEO mask almost entirely gone. She felt a strange vulnerability she hadn't felt since she started. I'm sorry for the way I've run things. I've spent so much time looking at the numbers on the screen that I forgot there were people like you behind them. People with daughters, and science projects, and integrity that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. I was leading a company, but I wasn't leading a community. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the streetlights. It's a common mistake in building like this. People see the titles and the suits, and they think that's the hierarchy. They think the top floor is the most important. But the real hierarchy is character, and that shows up in the dark, in the elevators, not in the meetings. The foundation is what matters most. Victoria smiled. I think I'm beginning to realize that. I think I need to check my foundation. Can I arrange a car for you? It's late, and the trains are slow at this hour. I'd feel better knowing you got home safely. Daniel shook his head, a playful glint in his eyes. I appreciate the offer, truly, but I have my old truck in the lot. It's got a specific way of starting that only I understand. A special sequence of the ignition and the throttle. It reminds me that some things are worth the effort of maintenance, and I have a volcano to prep. As Daniel walked toward the parking garage, Victoria stood in the lobby for a long moment. She watched him go, a simple man with a backpack, walking with a steady, unhurried pace that suggested he was already home. She thought about the board meeting in the morning. She thought about Sterling and his threats. But she didn't feel afraid anymore. She felt a new kind of strength in her chest. If a systems engineer could face down two predatory investors with nothing but 6 words and a calm gaze, she could certainly handle a boardroom full of them. She turned to the security guard at the desk, who was now wide awake. "I need the employee file for a Daniel Brooks in the infrastructure department, and I want him in my office at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. Not as an employee, but as a consultant. I want him to sit in on the board meeting." The guard nodded, confused by the sudden, vibrant energy in the CEO's voice. Victoria walked toward her waiting car, her head held high. The night was cold, but the air felt clearer than it had in months. She had found a mentor in the most unexpected place, and she was ready to change the rhythm of her company from the ground up. The next morning, the board of directors was in a state of high-alert panic. Sterling and his partner were already in the room, their faces set in grim, expectant smirks. They had their documents ready. They had their rumors prepared. They were waiting for Victoria to walk in, defeated, ready to sign over her legacy. But when the doors opened, Victoria didn't walk in alone. Beside her was a man in a clean, dark sweater and simple trousers, Daniel Brooks. He didn't look like an executive, but he carried a quiet, undeniable authority that made the entire room go silent. He looked like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Sterling's smirk vanished instantly. He looked at Daniel, and for a second, he looked like he wanted to crawl under the mahogany table. He remembered the 6 words. He remembered the wall of calm. He remembered the feeling of being diagnosed. "Gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice ringing with a new, unshakable confidence that shook the room. "Before we discuss the proposal, I'd like to introduce our new lead integrity consultant, Daniel Brooks. He's the person who helped me realize that our company's greatest strength isn't our data or our market share. It's our foundation, and our foundation is no longer for sale to the highest bidder." Daniel simply nodded to the room. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence was a reminder of the truth that had been exposed in the dark of the elevator. The board meeting, which was supposed to be a funeral for Victoria's leadership, became a revolution. She dismantled the investors' proposal with a clarity and a ruthlessness that left them speechless. She spoke of human capital, of technical integrity, and of a long-term vision that valued the people behind the screens. She spoke as a leader who had finally looked down. By noon, Sterling and his team were gone, their threats neutralized by a CEO who could no longer be bullied. The board had voted unanimously to support Victoria's new direction. The Iron Magnolia had become something much stronger, a leader who was grounded. Daniel left the office shortly after, his work as a consultant done for the day. He walked toward the elevators, the same ones he had been in the night before. This time the doors were held open by the receptionist, who gave him a respectful smile. As he reached the ground floor, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Emma. "Dad, did you finish the project? Are you coming to the park? The volcano is ready to blow." Daniel typed back with a wide smile. "Project finished, pal. I'm on my way. I've got a story to tell you about how some big grown-ups finally learned to follow the rules of physics. See you in 10. Victoria stood at the window of her office, watching the city below. She saw a small, old truck pull out of the parking garage and head toward the suburbs. She realized then that in a world full of people fighting for the top floor, the most powerful person was the one who knew the secret to a well-lived life on the ground. True strength. It isn't found in a title, a bank account, or a designer suit. It's found in the quiet courage to stand up when the world is pushing you down. It's found in the integrity of a man who isn't afraid of the dark. The elevator hero was home, and for the first time, Victoria Langford knew exactly where she was going. True power does not lie in a title or a designer suit. It is found in the calm courage of those who stand up for what is right, regardless of the consequences. Never underestimate the quietest person in the room. They might be the only one with the strength to keep the whole system from falling. Character is built in the shadows, but it shines brightest when the world gets loud. If you believe that one calm voice can change a dangerous moment, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have the courage to step in if you saw someone being threatened?